Hello, everyone. Welcome. Before we talk about today's topic, I'd like to make a land acknowledgement. We begin this webinar by acknowledging that we're meeting on Indigenous land. I myself am joining you all today from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. The city where I live is colonially known as Toronto, and it is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. I am grateful to have the opportunity to live, work, and play on this land. And in the spirit of making this land acknowledgement, I thought of sharing with you this beautiful painting that maybe some of you have seen at the Art Gallery of Ontario. It's called The Wisdom of the Universe by Christy Belcourt. And here's a piece on the thoughts from the author on this painting. Christie says, globally, we live in a time of great upheaval. The state of the world is in crisis, where we are witness to the unbearable suffering of species, including humans. Much of this we do to ourselves. It is possible for the planet to return to a state of well-being, but it requires a radical change in our thinking. It requires a willingness to be open to the idea that perhaps human beings have got it all wrong. All species, the lands, the waters are one beating organism that pulses like a heart. We're all a part of a whole. The animals and plants, lands and waters are our relatives, each with as much right to exist as we have. When we see ourselves as separate from each other and think of other species, the waters, and the planet itself as objects that can be owned, dominated, or subjugated, we lose connection with our humanity and we create imbalance on the earth. This is what we're witnessing around us. The planet already contains all the wisdom of the universe, as do you and I. It has the ability to recover built into its DNA, and we have the ability to change what we're doing so this can happen. So I wanted to share these reflections on the land acknowledgement because I also want to ground ground all of us in why we're meeting today. We're talking about a topic that is looking at new ways of thinking, new ways of collaborating, and new ways of coming together and supporting one another. There's so much outstanding work happening in communities, and we want to help communities continue doing the beautiful work that we're doing through maybe new tools and ways of supporting organizational resilience. And without further ado, I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar about using social finance to catalyze place-based change. I'm Jorge, and I lead our Communities Building Belonging network here at Tamarack Institute. We're so excited to have this amazing group of speakers. We have Cheralyn Chok from the Executive Director of Propel Impact, Monica Chaperlin, Coordinator of Business Community Anti-Poverty Initiative, Nicole Dawe, Executive Director, Community Foundation of Newfoundland and Labrador, and Victor Beausoleil, Executive Director, Social Economy through Social Inclusion, SETSI. I'm delighted to have this fantastic group of speakers, and we'll be exploring very interesting questions with each of them. We want to look at how social finance can help advance community-led projects across Canada. And if you want to learn more about our speaker bios, we encourage you to go through our website so you can read their bios in detail. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to jump into our questions right now for each of the speakers. And by the way, the format that we're having today is an informal conversation in which we're going to ask a specific question to each of them, and then we're going to come together and reflect on a short question that we're all holding and willing to explore together. So let's start with Victor. Victor, we often hear thought leaders refer to social finance and social economy as key concepts in community economic development. But what's the distinction between those two concepts? In your experience, what are the conditions that also need to be in place in order to drive effective social finance and place-based partnerships with communities?
Thank you so much, Jorge, as always. And before I begin all things, I always acknowledge my creator, my ancestors, and my elders for the ability to share and to build and to learn with all of you. I give thanks for that question. So a lot of times we conflate words like social finance social economy, solidarity economy, sustainable finance, community finance, impact investing. In terms of your question around distinction between social finance and social economy, it's pretty straightforward. Social finance is a movement. It covers various ways of using finance to create social and responsible investments, microloans, community investments, so on and so forth, to really achieve environmental and social impacts. There's a little distinction between that and the social economy. Social economy is about organizations that are using models of mutual aid and cooperative economics frameworks to build out ecosystems. So it's different from a culture versus an instrument. So, and I want to make sure that that distinction is understood clearly, because a lot of times when we're wrestling with or conflating these different terms that, like I mentioned before, we're doing it to try and tackle capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, and a whole bunch of isms. We're trying to find ways and means to be better neighbors. And to the conditions, in terms of your question, to enable social finance and social economy, or the solidarity economy, or circular economic frameworks, or regenerative economies, or sustainable models, the conditions are things that we learn in the sandbox as young people: grace, compassion, mercy, empathy, love, essentially belonging. Now, obviously, right now in our sector and ecosystems, we use advanced terms around people, planets, and profits, or ESG, or DEI, or what I like to term justice, access, inclusion, diversity, and equity. But the fact remains that grace, compassion, empathy, mercy, love, belonging, these are the sentiments that create the conditions where you care enough that you use a lens in terms of economic developments where you're censoring people, where you're censoring the waters, you're censoring the land, where you're censoring the flora and fauna around you. So I'm saying all that to say that, yes, there's a distinction between social finance, social economy. Social finance are a set of tools and instruments. Social economy is a culture, is a paradigm. So in African-centered cultures, we use the term ujamaa, which means cooperative economics. Or we'd say wonsa damua, if your hand is in the dish. I mean, you operate in a certain way. But and every culture has its own colloquials or terminology for the way they conceptualize how you organize your economic relationships in a way that makes sense for others. But I really believe that right now, as a nation, and in various regions across the planet, we have a remarkable opportunity to utilize the tools within social finance and utilize social economy and solidarity economies to actually move the needle on some very pervasive, hairy problems. And I know I don't have much time, but I love storytelling and quotes. I won't storytell because I only have 5 minutes, but 2 quotes are really important to me. One, because Martin Luther King just passed. He made a statement one time. He said, there comes a time when silence is a form of betrayal. There comes a time when silence is a form of betrayal. And another one of my favorite quotes of all time is Lilo Watson. If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come here because your liberation is bound with mine, then let us work together. The reason why I say that is because a lot of times these terms like social finance, solidarity economy, social economy, community finance, impact investing, regenerative economics, a lot of these terms are co-opted by private sector actors, by folks that generally understand that they can come into a market and profits. And I think that we're all smart enough to recognize that allocation, resources, and capital flows have to change. Like we're in such a traumatic place in the world right now where wealth is being distributed in such a disproportionate way that if folks do not actually stand up and say, you know what, this is wrong, this is why it's wrong, and this is how we can do better, and do it in a way with some tact, with some class, with some diplomacy, but still making sure they hold that sentiment that MLK said. There comes a time when silence becomes a form of betrayal. I'll stop right there. Thank you, my friend.
Wow, thank you, Victor. This is fascinating, and I love the connection that you're making to sensing people, waters, lands, and also how these concepts, they're very unique one each other, and at the same time, sometimes with these concepts we can just co-opt ourselves, right, in the work that we're doing, and co-opt others. And in the spirit of this sense-making process, Cheralyn, we have a question for you as well. And this one is about how organizations in the social innovation and social finance ecosystems interact with each other. Can you help us understand that?
Yeah, absolutely. I knew I would regret moving my question after Victor and following up with after him. So within the social innovation, social finance sector, we look at organizations under 3 buckets, and this is part of the curriculum that we train our fellows with at Propel. So on one side of the equation, we've got what we call capital demand organizations. So these would be the organizations on the ground that you might think of, the nonprofits, charities, co-ops, small businesses in your local communities that are actively addressing needs around food insecurity or maybe homelessness and houselessness, these very pervasive issues. On the other side of the equation, we've got organizations that supply capital, so we call them capital supply organizations, and they have financial and non-financial resources that are designated to advance objectives of the organizations on the ground addressing these pressing needs. And then in the middle, we have what we call intermediaries, and they act as a bridge between the capital demand organizations and the capital supply organizations, and they facilitate that flow of resources, whether it's training, like, how do you build your business model? How do you go out and raise either funding or financing? Conduct research. So those could look like incubators, accelerators, potentially, networks that are in place to connect all of these different organizations. A network that I like to think of is the Solidarity Working Group that Victor and his team convenes. And so maybe to just put that into, some context, I can use an example. So a mission-driven for-profit that some of us might be familiar with is Virtual Gurus. They participated in an accelerator. So this is where the intermediary comes into play, called the Fireweed Fellowship. And when Virtual Gurus was looking to raise money, they were invested in by Raven Indigenous Capital Partners, and Raven had raised money from NBC, Talis Pollinator Fund for Good, McConnell Foundation, all of these different capital supply organizations. So this will all be drawn out in I believe, in a cheat sheet that we'll pass on to all of the participants on this webinar. So just to put that in a little bit of context and just to create some sort of clarity around the different organizations, and we need all of them within this work for us to advance our goals.
Thank you, Cheralyn. This is super helpful. And maybe just a quick follow-up question, since we might have some youth in our audience. So what are some programs that Propel Impact offer to individuals and organizations that are curious to dive into social finance?
Absolutely. So at Propel, we exist to serve a few different groups. On one side, we've got youth who are really eager to work in the social innovation, social finance world. And we run a fellowship program where you get to dive into supporting nonprofits, charities through consulting projects, or make investments directly into small businesses, social enterprises, nonprofits through our impact investing fellowship. We are also gearing up to run our annual summer internship program where we pair impact investing funds, accelerators, advisory firms with trained talent from our fellowship programs. And for any organizations that are on this call, we are here to connect you with young talent, whether it's through projects, investments, or staffing you over the summer. So very happy to chat with anyone who's interested in learning more.
Awesome, thank you. So now we have a question for Nicole. So now we're going to start talking a little bit more about communities. And Nicole, I'm curious, based on your relationships with your community, why does place matter when we talk about achieving more equitable outcomes? And how do you see social finance embedded into local partnerships? And also, if we could follow up, what is needed to cultivate mutually reinforcing partnerships that support community-led solutions?
Yeah, those are all very, very big and wonderful questions to kind of work through. And so I'm Nicole. I'm currently the executive director with the Community Foundation of Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm joining today from the East Coast of Uktuhamkuk, which is the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk. We are a bit abnormal as a community foundation in that we are a provincial entity, and that includes this big and amazing place that we aim to steward philanthropic resources for, which also includes the Innu in Labrador and also the Inuit of Nunatukevet and the Inuit of Nunatsiavut as well. So a very kind of big place. So I think this is a piece that a lot of community foundations are moving through, and we are one that is very much kind of, I'd say, earlier in our exploration, though through some really amazing partnerships with Cheralyn and some other folks here in the province, we are kind of advancing towards that. So a lot of community foundations are trying to figure out two kind of components. Is we often, all of us have a lot of philanthropic investments. So how are those getting used in the best ways towards our communities? And then also, what are the opportunities with different social finance tools to really serve the challenges that we're seeing in the community? So I can probably tell a little bit about kind of our own story very briefly with that, and then maybe add a couple points onto your specific question. So we're kind of working with Community Sector Council of Newfoundland and Labrador and the Center for Social Enterprise here to work to try and figure out what does kind of community finance look like here in the province. So our first kind of steps in that were really looking like mapping, like what is already available, what are already people doing. We have business development corporations, which I think are called other things across the countries, but they already have social enterprise lending. We have Shorefast here, who does some very local and other sort of social finance pieces. And so we're really at the moment is we've kind of just tried to start having conversations together to say, how do we do a better job of connecting people with what already exists? Where are there gaps that we might want to look at developing new social finance tools? And overall, we've also been looking at social finance is only sort of one revenue tool. We know that revenue diversification is a challenge overall for the sector. So we've been trying to also fit this social finance exploration within like a bigger kind of revenue diversification journey, both for the community, but then also for folks who resource, how are we having resources that are meeting kind of community where they need to be. So that's also in the exploration, which looks like bringing in driving nonprofits like with Scale are doing amazing things on BC. If you're not familiar with them, you should look them up. So bringing some of that to what we're doing and trying to find that mix. So that's kind of been our kind of the evolution we've been on with kind of the social finance piece. And like a few of the things I think that are important as we're thinking about place and creating more equitable pieces is to draw out is, again, like folks from this place, and this is probably true of many places, but I feel like it's especially true for us Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, that we are very committed to being Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. And kind of that, I think, is one of the most, I know it's the thing I've held to my whole life. And anytime I've gotten unrooted, it's often been because I've gotten away from that core of kind of those gifts, many of which Victor named, I think, kind of in the start of this, that I feel like we were given in terms of how we grew up here. And so how are we centering that? Again, we have a very multi kind of community exploration of how this is going on, really trying to build off of what the amazing things that are already happening here. And then I think one other piece is to really look, especially for kind of to build on what Victor was talking about, as you're looking at, are people being performative or not in some of those languages, to really look at where power is centered and how it's being used in that. So lots of folks are probably familiar, with power over, power with, power to, like sort of those things, but how are we really building these social finance tools? And are people who are coming in, if like some social finance coming in, are they committing to be power with as much as possible, and kind of having some of those elements of what that is able to, to look like in terms of how things are developed really alongside community, which often means moving sort of at the space and specificity of place, while also figuring out how we are more networked in some more of those things, which is what we're trying to kind of hold across the island, and we have some kind of Atlantic kind of conversations going about, you know, what's that like. I think often about like mycelial networks, like how we're learning from the forest in terms of how we are organizing some of these things. And yeah, just kind of moving towards that so that it's, again, this network of resources is with social finance that's really nourishing the work that has to happen in community in a good way. Those were, again, we're kind of still early in this, so you're getting a lot of on behind the scenes in terms of what's happening, and also excited to be learning alongside everyone else here today.
Wow, thanks, Nicole. I love the thinking about building power alongside communities, and I think this makes a really nice transition into our next speaker, Monica. It's such an honor to be with you here today. We have so much appreciation for the work that you and your community have been doing as part of our Tamarack, one of our networks at Tamarack Communities Ending Poverty. Thank you for being here and sharing some of your experience and your community work. And the question is actually about takeaways from this experience. What are some takeaways from your experience mobilizing business leaders to support anti-poverty work in your community? And what can the social finance and community sectors learn from the unique partnerships that the Business Community Anti-Poverty Initiative has developed in St. John, New Brunswick?
Well, George, excuse me, these are very good questions, and I'll do my best to paint a picture of what's happening in St. John and how our business community is trying to help. Yeah, so first and foremost, my city is St. John, New Brunswick, distinguished by a spelling of our name, S-A-I-N-T, John, as opposed to Newfoundland's St. John. And I work for a collective of 30 local business leaders who are helping our city to break the cycle of poverty. My own organization, the Business Community Anti-Poverty Initiative, or we always call ourselves BCAPI for short, has been in place for 25 years. So over that time, we've certainly learned a lot about why people are trapped in poverty and why it's so important for our local businesses to work in partnership with our nonprofits, our neighborhood leaders, and our governments to build better solutions. We've experienced firsthand that when we apply all the principles of collective impact and work with common purpose, multi-sector leadership, and bold strategies, we can achieve awesome results that not only help people leave poverty behind them, but also improve the social and economic capacity of our city to thrive. We also know this work is a marathon, not a sprint. The big problems in our communities are complex. We can't solve all of them at once, but in St. John, we keep at it. We keep joining up our sectors and sharing our resources to build better solutions, and then trying to build on each success to achieve better outcomes for the people, our citizens. On the social finance front, BCAPI is far from being an expert. All we know is that our businesses must contribute their talents and resources to this vital work to help our city thrive well into the future. So I just thought I'd give you a few examples of the ways our business leaders are helping. When BCAPI initially formed, we undertook a poverty study to better understand who lived in poverty in our city and why. And of course, the only way to do that is to talk to those who live in poverty and the services that are trying to help. The study also gave us a really good picture of all the services and programs in St. John that we're trying to help. And our study also scanned the world for best practices elsewhere that were successfully breaking the cycle. And the results of the study really helped our whole community understand. It was the first poverty study done just for our city. And it really helped our city understand that St. John had a big problem. Perhaps unlike a number of communities, but like some, generational poverty had taken hold here. And while many of our services were alleviating the pain of poverty, very few services were helping people to journey out of poverty. And the consequences, of course, are extraordinarily costly. And we knew that really it was up to us as a community to change this picture and break the cycle. So we rolled up our sleeves and set to work. Some of the first things BCAPI did was to invest in a few small initiatives with our community to test out and demonstrate new approaches that specifically aim to help our vulnerable youth and families to journey out of poverty. And the success of these small initiatives further inspired our organization to join more purposefully with poverty reduction leaders and help develop a whole St. John strategy to end generational poverty. The strategy, it really put all of us on a better path to success. The collective effort brought more innovations with results that even inspired a New Brunswick strategy to reduce poverty. And it also inspired our New Brunswick government to invest $10 million to help our city build more solutions. And more businesses began to help. In St. John, it's our children, youth, and families who are at great risk of lifetime poverty, particularly if they live in our low-income neighborhoods. So that's who we focus on and learn from. A lot of BCAPI's efforts have been put towards building partnerships and helping to seed innovations that truly enrich the everyday lives of the children, that close their education gap, and that strengthen their pathways to employment. Essentially, we're adding resources that help to level the children's playing field of opportunity from cradle to career. So here's one recent initiative, BCAPI. We partnered with our school district to co-lead a demonstration project to close the education gap by grade 3 for 1,000 K-2 students who live in our low-income neighborhoods. BCAPI raised funds and contributed $1.5 million to the project. And to make a long story short, the project achieved its goal, and this compelled our provincial government to take over funding the project. And so today, BCAPI continues to work with government leaders to ensure the project's long-term sustainability and to scale it up. The project has inspired better education practices that will close the gap for many more New Brunswick children who live in poverty. So just a few takeaways, at least from my experience, having worked with the BCAPI throughout our 25-year span. I'm convinced that business leaders truly want to help our community solve big social problems. And of course, they have resources to help in many wonderful ways. But there's a lot of learning that happens, first of all. The formation of a business collective has been very helpful in engaging business in this work in our city. BCAPI has given our business leaders a home base to learn from and the confidence to work in partnership with leaders from the other sectors on this issue. We are not poverty reduction leaders, and so we really have to be very humble with and listen to who are the experts and do our very best to help in the ways that business can offer. It took a lot of time in the beginning for our business collective to truly understand poverty in our city and what reduced it. And we keep learning. They needed to understand it before knowing how they can help. Business leaders like to solve problems and build better solutions. They love research and innovation and evaluating progress. And they're very good at communicating and selling what works. And they're very good at making the economic case for investing in social innovations. They have strong connections with government leaders, and they can help gain government attention. Business talks to business. They recruit their colleagues and staff to help out. In St. John, we're really only at the beginning of understanding Canada's social finance movement. My big hope is that the experiences of our local business leaders will help to inspire larger business investment in community-led change. Because we are now very firm believers that it's our communities that are at the center of much needed change. So I hope that snapshot helps.
Thank you. There's so much wisdom in there. And thanks for grounding us at the heart of community work, Monica. We'll be sharing all of these reflections that each of you has been discussing with us throughout this webinar in a follow-up note. But just before we wrap up this conversation, I have a question for all of you, and feel free to reply organically. There's really not an order here. From what we've discussed today, what are some emerging trends that you're noticing on how social finance and community-led initiatives can collaborate to achieve more impactful, equitable, and sustainable outcomes? No pressure. Who would like to go first? Awesome.
I think one of the things that I'm really excited about and seeing a lot with here is kind of the relationship between social finance and community ownership. So again, one of those like fundamental things we can shift in terms of more things being like owned as assets by the community, and the ability for social finance to really catalyze and drive that forward. We're really fortunate. We have actually a project between the Community Sector Council and NL Federation of Cooperatives that's on the community capacity side of that, in terms of how do you support nonprofits, cooperatives, or people to start nonprofits and cooperatives that are going to, own, anchor, businesses or housing or childcare or whatever it sort of is, but that those kind of things that we need kind of more community ownership of, and how social finance can really be contributing to it.
Thanks, Nicole.
I'll go next just so that we can end on a high note with someone else. Yeah, this is beautiful. And once again, I give thanks to our ancestors and my elders and my community stalwarts for the opportunity to speak. So social finance is under threat from my perspective. It's partisan, which is very problematic for a whole bunch of reasons. Not all three levels of government and not all political parties see social finance as viable. That's dangerous for a whole bunch of reasons. I think social finance needs to be protected by private sector actors and profiteering gluttons, as far as I'm concerned. I think we need to find ways and means to harmonize the demand side of capital with the supply side of capital. It's actually imperative that we do that by setting a set of standards or developing pledges or regulatory frameworks. I think when you look at the demand side of capital, or SPO, social purpose organizations, or community service organizations, there's this implied notion that they must be investment ready. But when you look at the supply side, there's never the question of, are they allocation ready? Do they have the ability to allocate dollars properly? And once again, it speaks to that power dynamic that's very colonial, very capitalistic, and has imperialistic roots. I think that we need to look at the remarkable work my brother Jeff, Sear, and Wahi are doing in terms of outcomes financing. I think we need to look at the remarkable work that Susan Henry is doing at Alterna Savings. I think that we need to look at the remarkable work that Tiffany Callender at FACE, the only Black-led CDFI in the country, is doing, as well as Lise and Isaac from BKR Capital, Brother Liban from FFBC, Craig Wellington from the Black Opportunities Fund, Sister Jaleesa from the Table for Impact Investment Practitioners, Sister Suzanne from Tapestry Capital, the work that I just left a meeting with Sally Miller and Sister Afua from the Fair Finance Fund. There are models. Remember, a lot of the problems we're trying to solve is not a how. It's a who and a where. Who are the thought leaders and practitioners that do this work well? And where are the communities of practice or the models that can be replicated? There are place-based solutions all over. I was just reading something about the work happening in Colombia, in Bogota. So I'll leave that alone. I think we need to center people over capital, obviously, and create democratic and participatory governance frameworks. And then I think we need to look back. Remember, like as a person of African descent, I always go back to my roots, and there is a premise called Sankofa. Go back and fetch it. So there'd be no social finance in Canada. There'd be no social economy movements in Quebec. That is remarkable. Quebec is further ahead than any other province, based off a $20 million investment, created over $600 million in economic activity. They have a fantastic model. There's AFIs, Aboriginal Financial Institutions across the country. There's over 250 community futures associations. Why? Because Francophone leaders said we have an economic voice and we need power. A rural community said we have an economic voice, we need power. Same thing for Indigenous leaders. That would not be possible if it wasn't for civil rights leaders in the South that created the Community Reinvestment Act in 1977. Civil rights leaders had to die to create this act. And that's what literally established models of social finance that we're using today in Canada that still hasn't even caught up. So I'm saying all that to say that there's a lot of work to be done. The last three things I'll say quickly. We need more and better high quality disaggregated demographic data in this space. Let me say that again. High quality disaggregated demographic data. We need greater transparency around the processes and procedures of the investment committees of the various wholesalers and intermediaries, because some of the processes are very opaque. And I'm a storyteller. I'm a griot. I'm a son of a griot. I won't tell a story, but I want to leave with two quotes. One by Adrienne Marie Brown: things are not getting worse, they're getting uncovered. We must hold each other tight and continue to pull back the veil. And the last quote I'll leave us with is from my elder and my ancestor, Frantz Fanon: each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. These are powerful reminders, and thanks for also highlighting the Quebec unique context that unfortunately we didn't explore in detail in this webinar, but that would be a whole different conversation for sure. Anyone else?
I find myself in the same position, having to speak after Victor. So I think, Victor, what you were saying about like, are allocators ready to allocate is a really interesting point. And when I think about allocators and potential, investors in this space, because of the work we do with a lot of youth and students, look a lot at post-secondary. And I think a trend that we are not seeing, but I would love to see, is more post-secondary universities, colleges unlocking endowment capital for social finance and for impact investing. So I just did a quick calculation. Last year, there was 21 billion sitting in university endowments across Canada. And if we unlock just 3% of that, it would be equivalent to the federal social finance fund commitment for the next 15 years. And I think that, who can put pressure on universities to do this? I'm not sure. I think there's still, a lot of them are still in the divestment stage of, where is their endowment capital going? But if we want to grow this pie that is ready to be invested into the issues that, into solving the issues that we have to look at who are the other actors that have this power and this capital, and how can we put pressure on them to be part of this story.
Thank you, Cheralyn. That's a really great point. I'm conscious of time. Any other final words?
I'll just add my 2 cents, but probably repeating what I said earlier, is that I really believe that when businesses are involved in innovation from beginning to end, that they then get really excited about the value of their investment. In the social world, it's really hard to pull apart the social return on investment, but it really helps business understand that the effort that they put in and their money that they put in, the value comes back to them in spades. But I think it's a wrong thing to have a initiative already figured out and then go to business and say, give us some money, because you're not helping business learn. And I really believe that our business have to learn about social finance. It's a very foreign term among our local group. And the few steps we've taken to, formalize it like a social impact bond, haven't yet worked out, simply because we don't even have our government, our provincial government, really understanding that if they allow business to invest in things, take the risk with community and demonstrate better ways, that that government, public funding will benefit, healthier people, more children succeeding in school, more children capable of contributing to the working world, et cetera, et cetera. So it really reduces the public costs of not doing anything. And so government actually saves by involving the social finance sector. And I'm not sure that our governments are all online. It's pretty exciting to see the federal government with their social finance initiative. And we don't know yet how we're going to tap into that, but we have one business, Ernst & Young, that's all keen to try to be that intermediary or whatever that Cheralyn, I think that you mentioned, is that, that's it's really important. That work is really important, to be the broker between the initiative and business and government.
Thank you, Monica. Now, it's time for questions from our audience. So I'm going to open the Q&A box. Great. We have 2 questions here. The first one, are there successful examples of social finance supporting place-based climate action that you are aware of?
I think the work that Kadung is doing, I think would be a good example in terms of climate action work and raising capital. I just don't know how place-based it is.
Right.
I also think the work that Julie Segal from Environmental Defense Canada has been doing for a while now around the Climate Aligned Finance Act. I think if you lean in on CAFA, Senator Rosa Galvez is spearheading that work as a senator. I think those are 2 things that I think in terms of FinReg and social finance and some place-based work that I think can lean in on for sure.
Thanks, Victor. Any other thoughts? We're good? Awesome. So I'll move to the next question. Any existing impact frameworks you believe best articulate the power of community? Sure.
We use collective impact, the collective impact model, and really follow those principles. We go way farther when we with this approach than just be good to one another. It's sort of like, we know we need to do what's right, but we also need to do it right to get there. And I find that the collective impact model is very powerful in that way.
Thank you, Monica.
Yeah, I think about obviously the work that Jaleesa Brown and the Table for Impact Investment Practitioners is doing. I also think of the work of the Catalyze Community Finance Initiative. They're doing some remarkable work in the space. Yeah, those are the 2 things that come to mind right away.
Thank you, Victor. So well, we have more questions. I have been thinking of university endowments. How would the structure of 1% of the endowments shifting look like? I see it connecting to their operating funding from provinces. What do you think?
Ooh, I don't think I know enough about the flow of capital to speak to that. But yeah, 1% of 21 billion would be 210. Wait, am I doing this right? Yeah, around 210 million. But what we've seen in our interactions with schools is that, I mean, obviously there's a lot of reticence to being involved, and we are working with one university to see if we can shift it there. And hopefully if one domino falls, the rest will follow. But we're really going to need someone who's willing to, I don't even see it as a risk, but take that leap with us and invest, just in their local communities. But I think if we can tie it into student programming and student training and experiential learning for the students within their community, there will be more there will be more, interest in being part of this. So it's really around the strategy of how do we build all of these pieces so that, it's really hard to say no.
Yeah, for sure.
I
Thank you.
agree completely. Share, I'll put the link in the chat. So Share has the University Network for Investment Exchange and Engagements. And I think they have a model that's interesting because they've been very successful at pulling on pension funds, the folks that are hoarding capital in ridiculous ways. But yeah, if you go to the website link I just put inside there, Share actually has a table called the University Network for Investor Engagements. And I think to Cheralyn's point, I think Propel, from my perspective, is the most credible student-led, youth-led organization in the space that folks should rally around and support in terms of this work, because it wouldn't be that to engage institutional investors, everything for them is a risk, except we know that an Ontario pension fund that I won't mention lost a lot of money in crypto recently. So I'm saying all that to say that definitely lean in on the work that Cheralyn and Keshav and the remarkable team is doing at Propel. And as well, I put the link in the chat for Share and their University Network for Investments or Investor Engagements.
Awesome. Thank you, Victor.
I often think that our universities are strapped for cash, at least some of them in smaller communities. But again, I think practically we do have our post-secondary education institutions highly engaged in this work to break the cycle of poverty. And their research, it may not be money, but their research talents and evaluation talents and are just fundamentally important to to telling, to seeing progress and seeing where we need to be. And our students, as Cheralyn has mentioned, are very engaged in projects in St. John, so to give them that real life experience. So I think universities can help in a variety of ways, even if they don't have the money.
Thanks. Wow, we have so many questions. There's another one here. Maybe we'll answer 2 more questions and then we'll see if we can answer the other ones. Are you aware of any policy interventions that have helped social finance thrive in communities?
Attempted policy interventions or attempted or successful. I think that's yeah, I think there's been lots of attempts at policy interventions. And I think this can segue to the next question, because I see when it says, Victor, I think you mentioned participatory government frameworks earlier. So I'll try and conflate both questions in the interest of time. So in terms of interventions, the federal government, so the remarkable colleagues that we have at ESDC, Raphael Sauvé, Corinne Bagley, Robin Wise and her team. There's been many. I'm Sally Demiachi. So there was originally an actual committee that created a social innovation, social finance framework and model. And these were citizens that volunteered their time to create a series of recommendations to implement the Social Finance Fund, the largest social finance fund in the history of Canada, announced in the Fall Economic Statement in 2018, $755 million pots. Since then, there's been the SEAC, the Social Innovation Advisory Council, that's chaired by our remarkable colleague, Michael Toy, the executive director of SEDNET. Recently, Sally and her team implemented the CELI, the Social Equity Lens Investing framework. So all these are interventions and models and frameworks that are participatory, that are volunteer-based, and that's our interventions. In terms of successful interventions, Cheralyn mentioned earlier the Solidarity Working Group, but I know that the first iteration of the remarkable program, the IRP, the Investment Readiness Program, which was a social finance model or part of the social innovation, social finance framework, originally did not have a Black-led investment readiness partner. It also had to carve in $50 million through an intervention by NACA, our remarkable elder NACA, Shannon from NACA. So $50 million was carved out for Indigenous leaders in the social finance space, which has created some remarkable impacts. And more importantly, the first iteration of the investment readiness program did not have a Black-led investment readiness partner, but because of a policy intervention, the Foundation for Black Communities was able to bid and was received as a partner to create greater equity in terms of the allocation of resources. So I'm saying there's been attempts. There was an attempt at a Black-led wholesaler around the social finance fund. So there's always attempts. The challenge is obviously government and governance, and the dynamics that play out in terms of power and capital.
Thanks, Victor. We have, so I'm just going to ask one last question, and then we will have to wrap it up. But what we can do is that maybe we can share with our speakers the questions that were not answered, in case you'd like to provide a response in a follow-up email that we'll be sending to our attendees. So the last question is, does Cheralyn have any other insight for how to better introduce social finance concepts to youth and young entrepreneurs?
So what we've observed in our partnerships with some post-secondaries is that there's so much demand from students to learn, and they already instinctively know that this is the way that finance should be moving. The challenge is in the educators not being familiar or equipped to teach these concepts. And so I think that Propel, I don't want to just promote us, but because of the work we've been able to do, we're teaching what universities and colleges aren't, frankly, when it comes to social finance and social innovation. And so the more we're able to lend out our curriculum to other organizations that want to continue passing this on to young folks in their communities, or not just youth, but anyone who wants to learn, we're happy to do that. And it starts with things like, Tamarack asking if, we can share out that cheat sheet about the social innovation, social finance sector that we put together with all of you. And so it's not hoarding any information, but it's making it as accessible as possible, so we can fill in gaps where, if we can, share these resources with educators, and they can pass it on. There's so many ripple effects from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Cheralyn. That's great. And yes, we will include the cheat sheet and also a link to a publication that Nicole shared with us, so that also touches base on this topic. So don't worry about it. We'll include a bunch of useful resources to keep the conversation going. I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to go through some final announcements. So first of all, we have some exciting news to share with our communities. So today is officially the soft launch of our Communities Building Belonging cohort, the Circle of Actions. We will be inviting communities from across Canada to join us on a 7-month learning journey to develop plans and interventions that center belonging at the heart of community work. So we wanted to share this announcement with our amazing speakers, and in the spirit of celebration, we hope you can join us. We also have some other announcements on upcoming webinars that we should be sharing the screen with you shortly so that you can see them. These webinars are on January 31st and February 21st. There you go. Thank you. So building communities that create a sense of belonging. Sorry. Oops, we're having a technical difficulty there. So building community that create a sense of belonging. That one is with Lisa Helps and our very own Heather Kim at the Tamarack Institute. And also that's on January 31st and February 21st, creating a culture of abundance and equity with our friends from the Learning Tree, a US-based organization with great insights on how to do community work by putting people at the center. And last but not least, as some of you know already, Tamarack is building a movement that we want to create a sense of belonging that is strong, that is rooted at the heart of community work, and we are bringing together our different networks to help us in co-creating a national strategy for belonging. We want to strengthen communities with their voices and gifts at the center. You will be hearing more about it in the upcoming weeks for now, we will invite you to please take a look at our website and contact me if you want to start the conversation on this topic. And I think that's it for today. As I said, you should be receiving the announcements, the links to the resources that we shared today, and also some takeaways from our conversation. Thank you for joining us. It was really a pleasure to connect with all of you. And many thanks to our amazing speakers.